to share with you what we have and what we've learned. As you mentioned, the four-way test really captures a lot of the key elements of trust. And I think you'll see that as we roll through some of the key findings and that we're going to share with you today, especially in terms of the notion of fairness, in terms of building goodwill, and will be beneficial for all concerned. So as a social psychologist, I've been interested in trust for a long while. And I think it could be instructive to talk just for a few minutes about what is trust. And I'd like you to take just a moment to think about it for yourself. When you think of trust, what's the first image that comes to mind for you? Just keep it silent. Now, for me, one of the first images that comes to mind is a person doing a trust fall. I'm curious, how many of you have done something like this before? About half of you have? Okay, great. So I think when you're a person doing a trust fall, or this person right here, I think when you're in that kind of position, you feel a little vulnerable, right? You're relying on others to look out for your interests, to protect those interests. And I think also that there's an expectation that everything's going to work out okay. Well, that syncs up pretty well with how trust is defined in the psychological literature. If you're to look it up, you'll see that trust is defined as a psychological state comprising the intention to accept vulnerability based on positive expectations of another's actions or intentions. In other words, trust is the expectation that other people's future acts will safeguard your interests. People have been studying trust for nearly close to 60 years in one manner or the other. One of the first researchers to study trust created a set of questions that he called faith in people. That's how he thought of it. And over the past 45 years, a number of national surveys have been tracking this over time. From the early 1970s up through 2016, the percentage of Americans who say most people can be trusted has dropped from nearly half down to a little under a third. And other surveys have found a similar pattern. For example, over a similar time period, fewer Americans say that they have trust or confidence in our political leaders. Fewer Americans say they have trust or confidence in the mass media's ability to collect and report information. And most concerning to me, fewer Americans have trust or confidence in one another in terms of making important decisions. So we were wondering, what does trust look like here in Central Ohio? These are national photos. These are national views. What's the trend if we look locally? We know that trust is important when it comes to community or local affairs, right? Every time we vote, we're placing our trust in others and that we expect them to represent our interests. It's important for our business, for our personal relationships in terms of how they grow. And of course, there are business reasons to be concerned about trust as well. There has been research to state that when trust is high, business can be conducted more cost efficiently and effectively. And there have been other surveys on this point as well. Fewer than or less than 50% of employees say that they trust the companies that they work for. And a number of studies that have looked at trust, especially from the standpoint of consumers, have found that consumers who trust the companies that they purchase from are more likely to say that they're willing to recommend those companies, more likely to purchase again from those companies, to stay loyal to them, and more likely to spend more with them. So we wondered, well, what does it look like here and how can we find out? So my research firm and Fraser Hibey partnered together to launch the Columbus Trust Study. Earlier this year, we randomly sampled thousands of households from across Franklin County. We sent them multiple mailings over the summer, inviting them to participate, which they could do either online or they could respond by completing a hard copy of a survey questionnaire that we'd mailed to them, and which they sent back to us. We saw that we had a good statistical representation of the underlying population. So we've got basically we can trust our data in terms of who responded. So what did we see? What did we learn? Well, right off the bat, one of the things we wanted to do was take a look at that national statistic, how many people or what percentage of people say most people can be trusted, and understand what that looks like here. And what we found was nearly half of those who responded in the survey said that most people can be trusted, a percentage that's significantly greater than recent data that we see either across the nation or across the Midwest. We also saw, based on our survey, that nearly 2/3 of our respondents were currently employed, which is consistent with local statistics. And different from what we see nationally or internationally, most of the employees who responded in our study say that they trust their organization's leaders, which is really interesting. And I'm going to turn this over here in a moment to Lara to talk more about how employees relate to their employers and their organization's leaders. Lara?
Good afternoon, everyone. Isn't it great to know that we here in Central Ohio are more trusting than elsewhere in the nation and even in the Midwest. I just love that statistic. And that's one, we started the Columbus Trust Study last year, and that's actually a statistic that was held true last year as well. So it's 2 years in a row that Columbus is more trusting than the rest of the country. I just love that. But we wanted to dig deeper beyond just that surface level. And so in this year too, we did dig deeper. And we found that there are some interesting age and generational patterns to these findings. So specifically, as Ori mentioned, among employees of large businesses, trust is pretty good in leaders. You can see here between males and females, trust is really pretty high in terms of trusting the leaders of your company. But when we dig deeper into generations, we can see that trust starts to decline a little bit by generation. So millennials, and it looks like we have a few in the room, trust is pretty high. Generation X, which is my generation, drops a little bit, and then boomers, it drops a little bit more. But this is really made clear when you look at it by gender and generation. So the generational decline is really mostly among women. If you look at the lighter colored bars, so millennials, still trust is very, very high among millennial females, in fact, highest of any group. Generation X, trust is about the same between men and women. But then when you look at boomers, the women trust factor goes way down. And I just think that's so interesting. And of course, we didn't ask why, right? In this year Columbus Trust Study, we didn't ask why. Maybe next year we'll dig deeper. But I think looking at the headlines right now, I think we can understand a little bit why women boomers trust might be down a little bit. Perhaps there's some frustration about perceived glass ceiling. There could be many, many issues at play. But this is a great opportunity for all of you leaders in the room to do some listening in your own organizations and to find out if this is the case in your own organizations with your female employees who are in the boomer generation. I think this is just really an opportunity to do some listening and find out if it's the case, and if so, what can you do to help? So with that, what are some ways that leaders can build trust in your organizations? We don't just put out the trust study, we also try to put out some tips and some insights and some best practices that will help organizations to really shore up that trust in their organizations. And so at the heart of all of this, at the heart of trust, both last year with the Columbus Trust Study inaugural year and this year, we feel it all comes down to the 3 C's of building trust. The first one being character, which is do the right thing. It's pretty simple. It comes down to intent and integrity. And then competence is do it well. Make sure that you are capable and competent and that you're showing great results. And then connection is kind of a 3rd C that isn't as obvious, and it has to do with listening. And it has to do with communicating and connecting and building those relationships, whether we're talking about relationships with employees, with customers, just basically external or internal relationships. And so when we look at why employees trust their leaders, because we dug a little bit deeper here, we found that character was really, really critical. So especially among small businesses, they wanted to make sure that their leaders were honest. And so when they perceived their leaders to be honest, their trust was high. Likewise, in small businesses, they wanted to know their leaders care about the community. And so when that was the case, their trust was high. At large companies, people really wanted to know the leaders cared about the employees. And so that was an important factor there. And all of those attributes fall within that character set. Now, competence was also a really important factor for trust. So at large businesses, employees really wanted to know that the organization has a history of success, which makes sense. And then large businesses also, employees valued their personal relationship with the leader. So if they had had some sort of a personal encounter or experience with the leader, they were more likely to trust them. Connection, the 3rd C, also plays an important role, but a supporting role. Employees wanted to perceive leaders as open and transparent, and they wanted to make sure that leaders share frequent and clear communications. So what happens when there's distrust present? So we looked a little bit at that. And again, it comes down to character. Character was at the top of the list. So employees who didn't trust their leaders felt that their leaders don't care about the employees. And that was a leading reason why people distrust their leaders. So this is a little bit hard for you to read, and I will say that all of this information is available at the website ColumbusTrustStudy.com. We'll come back to that at the end. But how can leaders earn employees' trust? There are some really good nuggets here, but we've got some red stars. Let's see if I can, my pointer. There are no dogs or cats in the room, right? Okay. So basically, showing honesty was a critical factor for earning employees' trust, and then also improving communication, really listening to employees. That's why I kind of hit that earlier. That's such a key point. And then we actually had a large number who just said, I already trust my leaders. I don't really know why, or they didn't really want to delve deeper into it with us. So I think the listening piece and really kind of doing that right thing, having that character piece in place. So we do have some very specific takeaways beyond this. We have tips and insights and best practices that are available on our website. Again, to sum up, character rules. Character is absolutely the most important thing. So you've got to be doing the right thing for your employees, for your business, for your customers. So when is the last time that your leaders honestly assess the quality of the character that you're portraying and that you're putting out into the world? What steps can you take to strengthen the voice of your organization's character? So maybe you're doing all the right things, but you're not talking about it. You're not sharing about it with employees or with customers. So that's something to look at. And then on the connection side, because I can't help you with competence. So that's, you're all competent at what you do. But the character and connection are the areas that we feel like we can help shore up. This connection, employees want to hear from their leadership. They want the leaders to improve their listening and communication skills, and there are so many ways that you can do that. You want to be more transparent, and so it's a really good idea to take stock of what you're doing and how you can improve it. And we've actually created some tools that are all free on the Columbus Trust Study website. The first is this audit or checklist to really take a hard look at your organization's trust infrastructure. And it runs you through a series of about 24 questions to really kind of analyze your company and how well you're doing in these 3 C areas. And it looks at how you're doing with the community, with associates, with all of your different important key stakeholder groups. And so it's a really, really great thing to just download for free from the website and then take a look at with your leadership team at your organization. Another tool is a simple tip sheet that we have on the website. And this is really all about how to build trust with your community, with your customers, and with your associates. And this is actually at ColumbusTrustStudy.com, and then you go all the way down to the bottom and click on 2016. This was actually a piece we put out last year, but we felt it held up really well, so we're offering it again this year on the website. And then finally, last year we did a white paper all about the Columbus Trust Study, about the enormous volume of trust literature that we poured through, some of the studies that Ori mentioned that have been done nationally. We've got like a really large volume of research that we pulled and insights that we pulled from those documents, and that's all out there as well on the Columbus Trust Study website. And that's the website, ColumbusTrustStudy.com, and we hope that you'll take a look and download some of the information and resources that we have there, and we hope it'll be useful for all of your organizations. And with that, Ori and I are open for questions. Thank you very much. Yes?
Did you measure anything between different cultures? Because Columbus is a fairly diverse community, and trust varies based on socioeconomic as well as cultural backgrounds.
Trust in your equipment, right? Or not? All right, so the question was, did we look at any or conduct any further analyses to understand how trust may be experienced or be perceived as a function of people's socioeconomic status or race or ethnicity? The answer is yes, we did. We tracked socioeconomic status in terms of education attainment and in terms of income. We also measured or asked people to self-report their race and ethnicity. What we saw was that trust was highly related, significantly correlated with educational attainment, such that those with more education were more likely to say most people can be trusted. We also saw a pattern by which those who identified as either black or Hispanic were less likely to say most people can be trusted. So there is a number of interesting demographic patterns there that really speak to the importance of one's life experience and how that folds into the experience of trust. So thank you for the question. Yeah, I saw it back there. Yeah.
Let me ask you one question. You talked about building trust. In our society right now, it's called losing trust. How do you reconstruct? How do you get that on the right track?
Yeah, that's a great question. For me personally, I think that there's, and we didn't share this particular result with you, but I believe it's accessible online. We also saw that there was, and this I think is going to be received really well by you all, considering what you're doing. We saw that there was a very strong relationship between those people who say most people can be trusted and the extent to which they're involved in the community, volunteering behaviors, and the extent to which they volunteer their time in a typical month. It's a very strong correlation. And so our data don't allow us to say that more volunteering leads to more trust or the opposite. It's possible that both of those explanations is true. But there is a significant relationship there. And if we do want to see trust increase in the community, and if we do want to see the community be stronger, then perhaps volunteering more of our time may help set that stage for that kind of trust to grow. And so one of the calls to action for me is to get out there and to do more, particularly with people who you aren't quite familiar with, yet have a similar objective or goal. And if you can find that, and if you have an opportunity to let yourself be vulnerable to someone else, then trust can grow, and therefore not only are you working to build a stronger community, but perhaps increase in trust as well. So, yes, sir.
Is there a correlation between trust and naivety?
That's a good question. And there are some of the other things that we measured. Okay, so the question was, is there a correlation between trust and naivety? Possibly yes. We also measured a number of personality type variables. In psychology, there's a thing called the Big Five. Most people tend to score high or low on different kinds of dimensions. And we do see a certain relationship between trust and skepticism towards others, or more strongly, a lack of warmth or coldness towards others. So it's not naivety per se, but more about the extent to which you're positioned to engage in a positive manner with others that I see a strong relationship with. I see a question over there. Was there a question on this table? Okay. Yes, sir.
Did you find any statistics regarding trust in the media in Columbus? Having done the study for 2 years, did you see any change in trust in media?
Thank you for the question. So the question was, did we measure anything relating to trust in media, and has there been a change in time, particularly as it relates to Central Ohio? We didn't measure that strongly last year. We did measure it this year, so I can't speak to change over time. But we did measure the extent to which people have trust in different information sources. So what information sources do they tend to rely on for information, right? And to what extent are different informational sources trusted ones for them? What we saw was that traditional forms of information gathering and reporting, so television, radio, newspapers, were all regarded as more trustworthy sources than other ones such as social media or other internet uses like ratings and recommendations. Now I'm sure that varies or is different depending on what you're trying to do. If you're trying to just gather information and make a decision about something, that might be different from, say, searching for a particular product or service. But overall, it seems that some of the more traditional forms of engaging with the community or public are still going strong. Even though social media plays an important role in terms of connecting, that may not be playing as an important role in terms of building trust.
Is that the same for all generations?
No, we saw an effect by age in terms of informational sources. So younger generations those who were younger in the survey were more likely to rely on other forms of internet searches or other sources of information that's available on the internet, and a little bit more of an endorsement for social media.
Who funded your research? And secondly, how do you account for the difference between the Columbus and the national findings? Is it along the lines of when you normally ask people, they don't trust politicians, but they like their local politician? Does that account for some of that, do you think?
Possibly. So the first question was, how was the survey funded? And then how would we explain the difference between the trust scores or trust ratings here in Central Ohio versus the nation as a whole? So the study was mostly self-funded between my firm and Fraser Hyvee. This year we also had the support of the Better Business Bureau of Central Ohio. So they were a presenting sponsor of this, which is really great. They also have a good number of resources as well for you to consider. In terms of the difference, I'm not quite sure. I'd like to know more about that, honestly. I came from Philadelphia 20 plus years ago, and I had been told that Midwesterners are more trusting people. And so here I am 20 years later trying to better understand that. I think it's a great question for further research.
Can your trust study be used as a marketing tool by the development people in the city of Columbus to entice new people coming into the city, as far as corporate executives who want to relocate or want to add a factory or a warehouse, or I mean, as a positive influence on people's decisions, because we're so much higher than the average within the Midwest, let's say.
Sure. So the question was, can the trust survey results be used by local economic development efforts or other kinds of development efforts to attract more people and businesses and other organizations to the area? My answer would be a strong yes. I hope that people would find this interesting, find this useful in terms of attracting more attention to this great area.
But with that, I would have to ask the question, tell us how many people were involved in the study?
Sure. We had nearly 500 people complete the study, so in a response rate of close to 20%, which is actually higher than most other surveys that are conducted.
So you had 100 people out of 500 who responded.
Oh, no. 500 total completed our survey and sent it back to us. Yeah.
2,500.
Yeah. So we had a nice return, nice response rate.
Was there a distinct difference between the trust of leaders in the big companies as compared to the smaller companies?
No, I think that it's the manner by which trust is felt or experienced that's different. So the overall percentage of people, his question was there a difference between employees who trust their leaders in a large employer context versus a smaller employer context? And when we talk large or smaller, we're talking 50 employees or more versus less. We saw similar levels of trust in those leaders, whether you're in a small business context or a large one, but the reasons why they trust, that's what's different between the two. And that's what suggests to us that there are different pathways to trust that leaders can take. And we also see, and I think it's going to be online as well, it's further different in terms of a consumer's reaction to different kinds of businesses. Why you may trust a bank is different from why you would trust a healthcare organization or a retailer.
You showed a map of comparing Ohio to the Midwest and the South. Do you have any comparison to either East or West Coast?
We don't have that, but it would be easy to generate. So the question was, we showed a map that compared Franklin County's results to a national estimate as well as the upper Midwest estimate. And the question was, can we find other comparison points? The answer is we certainly can. I just happened to choose the two that I think could make for an interesting story today. But all that, those data from those other sources, they're publicly available data from a federally funded survey that's been going on for over 40 years.
Two questions. Your survey might not have been broad enough, but did you find significant differences between atheists, agnostics, and those involved in religion? And secondly, did you find significant differences among those involved in different religions?
Yeah, so the question was, did we, I guess I'm hearing a couple of different questions here. Did we ask about religiosity or religious affiliation in our survey, and does that relate to trust? We did not ask that in our survey here. I believe that as part of that national survey, that includes trust variables, they do ask about a variety of other factors that includes the extent to which one considers oneself to be religious or spiritual, the extent to which one attends services on a weekly basis, in addition to other kinds of general orientation variables like liberal conservative or Republican or Democrat identification. So those data are available at the national level, and maybe in that upper Midwest level. We don't have the data to speak to that here locally.
Have you done any of this study in the larger corporations in Columbus, those that have 2,000 or more employees?
No, but I think that perhaps the BBB may have been involved in something like that. So the Better Business Bureau offers a number of tips and assessments that can be used by organizational leaders to build trust within there and to assess the level of trust. So it's possible that they may have. I know that in the future we're thinking about focusing more on within businesses to better understand the different pathways to trust. So that could very well be something you might be hearing about next year.
In defining the employer, did you look at large employer nationally or locally oriented?
It was locally. So the question was, how do we define large employer, or what were people reacting to? So in our survey, we asked if they were employed, and we asked them to identify how many people are employed by their organization.
You show the generations you go through, which is very interesting to me, because as a worker, as an employer to people of all three generations, and really trying to work that in of trust, and it shows a decline. Is that correlation of age? As the younger you are, you trust people more, and as you get older, you trust them less. I mean, what did you find out between those three categories of your slide?
Right, so the question here is, to what do we think is driving that generational decline in trust over time? Yeah, thank you for bringing that up. I think that that's a place where we'd like to dive in more in additional research on this. There's not a lot that we can say why in this. I think asking follow-up questions one-on-one to some of the people who participated would be a great way to get to the answer to that question. We have some of our opinions about it, but whether or not that's true.
So the generational decline was especially notable in women. There was a slight decline in trust among men from generation to generation, but a really marked decline in women. And so, you know, it's hard to know exactly why that is, but again, a look at the headlines right now might have something to do with that. I speculate, but Ori, the guys in the study don't want to speculate. So, but that's, you know, that's one possibility. Does that help? Again, I think it makes sense to do listening in your own organization, you know, and maybe do some focus groups within your organization among, you know, women leaders and women employees to find out if it's an issue for, you know, for your employees and your associates.
On a random basis throughout zip codes in Central Ohio?
Yep, so the question is, how do we randomly select people? And the answer is yes, it was fully random. So the United States Postal Service has a database of over 98% of all of our residential addresses, and we accessed that and randomly sampled from there.
So 2,500 out of how many in Central Ohio?
Enough. So the important thing about random sampling is the metaphor that I like to use is like if you have a big crock of soup, right? And if you want to sample the soup, if you just take a little bit of a ladle off the top, if you haven't really mixed them up much, you can taste that little ladle and you think, whoa, there's a lot of onions in that. But if you take the time to really mix it up, really get it randomly distributed within there, and then take the ladle out, that little sip is going to give you an excellent representation of what the entire crock is tasting like. And that's the kind of theory or concept that we applied to this.
All right, that looks like it's it.
All right, thank you all for your questions to us. Thank you.
Ori and Laura, thank you very much for producing this report. I think that we all found it to be very important. And thank you for presenting today. We appreciate it. Please join us again next week. We will have Dr. Rustin Moore from the OSU School of Veterinary Medicine, and he's going to talk on the topic of the power of a pet. We'll see you then. Thank you.